Pigeons 420. Mr. Grow It. And Rob from Cannabis Lifestyle TV. From the Stash Podcast.
From the Stash Podcast. It's your boy Rob from Cannabis Lifestyle TV, Pigeons 420, and Mr. Grow It. Thank y'all for being here again.
Good to see you guys. Damn, I was like post-election. Damn.
Yeah,
I guess it is no matter what, right? I guess we can't go back in time now.
Well, no matter what, it still really isn't post-election here. Well, that might be another
That's
episode.
A good point.
We're still like hanging
That's
out
a good
in
point.
limbo and purgatory, you know, so.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
It's a weird fucking deal, but, you know, the contrast between, let's say, both parties is kind of like the contrast between the subject of tonight's conversation, both mainstream parties, we'll say, or today's conversation, would be organic versus synthetic or synthetic versus organic. It's a debate that like could just continuously go. We've done one on Cannabis Lifestyle TV talking about it, and I feel like it still didn't drill the point across. And I think this conversation, now that I've got more experience in organic, is going to be more helpful for even myself. Now I can be a little bit more confident, talk a little bit more with real experience instead of just reading or seeing what somebody else has done that I know personally. So yeah, let's get right into it.
Let's do it. I have absolutely zero experience when it comes to organic. I've been synthetic since the day I started. I've kind of gotten into a theme with my experience or my career that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And it's either hindered or really supported my success throughout my gardening careers. And unfortunately, organics has not been one of those things that I've really dabbled in. And I've, you know, kind of, I did do worms at one point. I tried to do worm castings. But aside from that, I'm a synthetic guy. And I'll be interested to hear what you guys have to say. And I got questions for you guys in terms of the benefits. And is organic really worth the time?
How dare you, Pigeons? How dare you? I now think differently of you. You're not as good of a grower as me and Rob, since we do organics.
You're right.
You're on a different level from what I've heard.
You're right.
So, you
Sarcasm.
You're right.
But the point I'm trying to make there is that, who cares if somebody grows synthetic only and organic only? We're going to talk about the pros and cons of both. Yes, one of the main ones is organic is more environmental friendly, but not everybody does it. So judgment, this is kind of a judgment-free zone here when we talk about this one.
That's the goal, man. You know, being somebody who I would say I've always preached that one isn't better than the other. It's kind of an ignorant statement because it's always preference. And that's the thing. I think that's our rule of thumb here. No judgment zone, all preference. Let's just lay out the facts and our opinions, and you can pick it how you want. But now that I've got more experience with organic versus synthetic, I see why I got into synthetics originally and why I didn't get into organics. But now I'm like, man, maybe I should have jumped into organics first. And you know, for me, I guess getting into it was simplicity of bottles. I'm like, oh, do you use A, B, and C? All right, cool. I'm going to do that too. And then someone says, oh, I also use this. I'm like, oh, all right, cool. Oh, and then I also use this. Oh, all right, cool. 7, 8 bottles later, I'm like, oh, shit. All right. Had a decent lineup here now all of a sudden, and there's a lot more of a workload. But at the same time, I was getting the results that made my buds. Like, these are things that I think it's the marketing that gets a lot of people jumping into the synthetic side. As where organic labeling and branding usually doesn't have that same pop that you'd see. Personal, this is my opinion.
Yeah, and when it comes to saying which one's kind of easier in the sense, I think some people can argue that synthetic is easier, right? You've got 3 bottles, for example. Maybe you've got some CalMag on it, 4 bottles. Mix it up into water, pH the water, and then water the plants. On the flip side of things, some people can say that organic is a little bit easier because you're just top dressing. So it can go one way or another. I personally have been growing with bottled nutrients a little over 10 years now. That's what I started out in. And the reason why I started was for simplicity's sake, right? You just, what I just said, you just mix it into water and then feed the plant. Going into it, when I first started, organic seemed kind of overwhelming in a sense because you have to learn about so much more. There are so many different amendments. I could name off 24 different amendments when it comes to organic. And it's like, okay, well, which ones do I mix when? And there just can be a lot of confusion when you're first starting out with organics. So, as a beginner, oftentimes I personally, most of the people will start off with bottled nutrients. And I kind of recommend people to start out with bottled nutrients instead of trying to spend hours upon hours researching the different organic amendments. And then trying to play kind of like a guessing game or just kind of estimating which ones they think would go well. I think it's kind of less prone for deficiencies if you are going through kind of bottled nutrients and you're kind of spoon feeding. And we know it's also a faster response, right, as far as uptake. So the bottled nutrients are a smaller molecule. They're readily available for the plant. They're in a plant available form. Organic nutrients first need to be broken down by microbes first. And that can take around 2 weeks is what's often said. So if you do run across deficiencies and you're growing bottled nutrients, well, you just either add nutrients or flush and add nutrients. If you're going with the organic nutrients, well, then it's not that easy because when you're adding nutrients, you got to wait 2 weeks and the plant could get worse before it gets better. Then you're saying, okay, add in teas, which is a whole nother thing, part of organics. But yeah, there's kind of rambling on a little bit there, but
no, dude, you're hitting
quite a
on the
bit.
head, man.
Yeah, quite a bit when it comes to organic versus synthetic. There's a lot of things to kind of look at there.
Yeah, I think you absolutely nailed it. I think as you guys were talking, I was thinking, the only reason I never really went into organics was because of the amount of information I needed to learn as a grower about the plant, its physical makeup, its chemical makeup, its microbial makeup, the nutrients that need to be added, what provides those nutrients. Just because you need potassium, what the fuck gives you potassium? You know what I mean? There was a lot of things that I just never wanted to take into consideration when I first started growing cannabis. And that's it. I believe I started with Miracle Grow when I first started. It was just a matter of, I believe there was a time release nutrient in the soil or the potting mix that I was using.
Slow release.
Yeah. And then as my gardening started to evolve or started to thicken, I started to apply more knowledge or education or time towards getting to know what the plant's needs are. And that's when I moved into a real nutrient line, something that was far more designed to meet the needs of the cannabis plant in particular. And that's when I started to realize, simplicity. I don't need to know anything. I never really had a 3-bottle system. I typically went into just a full line setup from 10-ish plus bottles. But then I started to realize the simplicity of it. I don't need to know anything. The instructions are on the back of the damn box. I just have to extract 15 milliliters out of one bottle, put it into a jug, and away you go. And then everything else that you learn came off of those experiences in terms of deficiencies and toxicities and the myriad of issues that can arise from synthetic. But I can fully appreciate the fact that within days, you can see, or in some cases hours, depending on your environment, you can see the effect of what's happening to your plant based on the food that it's taking in. So troubleshooting makes it a lot easier as well when it's either increase or decrease. There's only 2 options when it comes to troubleshooting. So simplicity, I think, is one of the biggest things that you can say goes along with synthetics, because the whole idea or formula of what you're feeding your plant has already been done. It's in the bottle for you. You just need to apply it and your amounts rather, or what you're trying to dial in. So simplicity was key. It allowed me to focus on other things like the environment, the lighting, the seeds, the strains, the so on and so forth. So you guys really nailed it on the head with your description of why you started and the appeal of synthetic over organic.
Well, I think that was my perception initially, and now that I've gotten into the organic sides, I see maybe I was wrong. Maybe I could have approached it a very comparable way. I could have followed something like, rest in peace, great legend, Subcool Super Soil. Just literally blindly followed it, just like I do in a bottle. I don't need to know the science. Just tell me what it is, and I'm going to do it. Bro science. Or I could have done something like the Build a Soil mix, which is what I'm using now, where they mix everything for you. They take care of it, where you can either buy a bag and buy a bag of dry amendments pretty much, and amend your own soil. In this case, I'm using sphagnum peat moss, Or you can go and buy their pre-made mix, their potting soil, the Build a Soil Potting Soil 3.0, which is what I'm using right now for one of my plants. And all I've done is watered it. I know what's in it. Like I can read off this crazy list. We have a video on Cannabis Lifestyle that breaks down everything in it. But honestly, I didn't really care so much at the time. I was like, I don't really give a shit. Just it's organic, cool, let's run it. Because I wanted to be able to figure it out as I'm going. The difference now is everything's already in the medium. So I don't have to worry about anything other than the plant. So I can like remove the thought process of learning all the sciences in the back end and now just focus on everything above the medium for the most part. I'm feeding that medium to keep it going, but a large enough container is going to make it so all you got to do is water. That plant's not going to take up the food so much because it's got a big giant source of food. It's like you got a giant reservoir for a hydro plant. You don't got to replace it as often. In this case, it's a little pricier when you buy it. It was like 2 cubic feet for $25 plus $20 shipping. So it wasn't cheap, but I can reuse it. I can continue to use it. So there's the pros and the cons. But when you're talking about organics, I actually started my second run was a bottled organic line. So I think really the argument wouldn't even be synthetic versus organic. It would almost be like bottled versus medium, because you've got Roots, you've got Nectar of the Gods, a company I don't even want to endorse. Another one, which I used to deal with, was General Organics, their General Hydroponics organic line. Veganic, they said it was. I got great results, man. Only reason I left them is because the company's not super ethical, and I'd rather not spend money with companies like that. But for the most part, the organic side of things, I didn't notice a huge difference at all in the bottled side. Like synthetic, well, mineral-based versus organic, I noticed no difference. So it was kind of a scenario where I wouldn't say I experienced organic right away. It was more the fact that I got my feet wet in it, and I'm like, oh, well, all right, the plant's going to kind of take up what it takes. Organic, synthetic, you can't find the periodic table of elements that shows either. The plant takes it up how it takes it up. The difference is, again, like you were mentioning, Chris, how fast it takes it up. The slower release in the organic side versus the faster in the mineral-based. A lot of people like to say mineral-based versus salt or synthetic, so we'll go mineral-based. Shout out to Vader OG on that one.
Yeah, and I've used the organic bottle line before, and a company that I don't think is ethical and I don't endorse at all anymore. But you can catch them on my older videos, which is Bloom Yellow Bottles, and I think they have 15 bottles or like 19 bottles or something like that, something crazy. I mean, when you count the foliar feeds and stuff like that, but I mean, it just kind of defeats the purpose of making the process easier, right? So like you're still mixing up into water. I didn't have to pH. They say don't pH. So that's one less thing to do, but it just kind of still took just as long. Their ratios that they had mentioned, I tried to go full strength because it's organic, and I still ended up getting like slight toxicity issues. So that kind of threw me off a little bit. But I tried the bottled organics. I don't think I'd ever go back to it. And now I am on to the organic dry amendments. So shout out Green Sunshine Company. I'm using their earth dust formula. They have 2 bags. One of them is base, which is really the what you amend with to begin with, and you can do feedings within the vegetation stage, top dressing, for example. And then they have their boost, which is for the flowering stage. And I mean, it's definitely a lot easier in the fact where you're just doing that initial amend into the soil. And then, say you do a 30-day veg, then flip to flower, you would do a top dress before flower, then 30 days later, do one more top dress. And that's it. You're just kind of watering all the way through. You do need to make sure that your pH is in the correct range of your water. Like my water comes out at like 7.5 pH or something crazy like that. Oftentimes you'll hear organics, oh, you don't need to pH, the soils will adjust it. Well, yeah, for the most part, if the water going in is pretty natural, a neutral pH, for example, then you probably don't have to worry about pHing. But if it's super high or super low, you probably still want to adjust that pH before going in. I do, and it's definitely proven to be beneficial. So,
and I think it also depends on what you're using. So in your case with the dry amendments, like you're feeding kind of from the top. So the water isn't necessarily going to be working through the system that's going to have the buffer that'll work it out like you would with like a super soil, let's say. Like over time, you could re-amend that and you might have that mix already. But for example, using coco, I know a lot of people do coco with a dry amendment, like, Matt, Mr. Canuck, shout out to him. It's going to be treated a little differently. You got to be a little bit more controlling in that sense. Well, the plant's obviously going to do what it wants. It's going to take up that food properly. The pH is definitely going to be more of an issue. And I know other people who use reverse osmosis water, And that again, it's going to react a little differently. There's nothing for it to stick onto. Like it's just weird how a plant in the medium reacts so differently between coco, soil, hydroponic, all these things. But the plant, no matter what, will tell you what it wants. That's what's cool about everything. Is if you're fucking up, you're gonna know because the plant will tell you.
Yeah, one thing I learned is about, with the organic nutrients, the medium needs to be moist at all times. And that's something I struggle with. I live in a very dry climate. Natural humidity here is like 30%, 35%, which is like super dry. And so my medium dries out faster. And if that medium's not wet at all times, then the microbes go dormant. And we need the microbes in order to break down those nutrients to plant available forms. So I've struggled with kind of my medium drying out a little bit too quickly, or not keeping it moist enough to where that breakdown process didn't happen. And then I saw deficiencies in my plant, when growing organically. So that's something definitely key to keep in mind. Anyone who's going towards that route, organic route. One thing that can help with keeping the medium moist, which has helped for me, is having a mulch layer. So on top of that soil, for example, I run soil. I have barley straw up top. And you can do like wood chips. There's several different mulch layers you can do, but that definitely helps keep that layer below the mulch moist. So it's a quick tip there.
Well, and I think that's where, again, preference comes clearly into play when it comes to the how you feed, how you treat your plant. But they all have a comparable amount of workload, really, when you look at it. Because if it's simplicity of just add with your bottle nutrients, some people don't find that difficult. That's that Taylor Swift time. That's when you're chilling doing your thing, Pigeons. Other people, it's the every 90 days you got to do the work with your garden. And that amount you do in that 90 days may be more than what you do in that entire period of time broken down in your 3 to 4 feedings a week. Some people like it, some people don't. I see Green Goblin, he'll do, like one big mix day where he's kind of re-amending all of his medium, doing everything like that. But then I'll also see he'll do a top feeding. And then I'll also see he does a tea. And I'm like, whoa, the labor here is a lot higher than what we initially discussed. And it's all preference. You don't have to do all that. Your plant will grow, but you're not going to get the most benefits. As we're in the bottled side of things, you follow the nutrient chart, you're going to get pretty much the most optimum results you can get for the most part. Again, obviously. But then you look at something like an indisputable fact is return on investment, your cost. So Pigeons, like, what's your average expense for your nutrients monthly? Do you have like a recurring monthly expense, or do you buy your stuff more in bulk?
Unfortunately, I'm in a very blessed position where I've never paid for my nutrients.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I have a wonderful sponsorship, and we've had wonderful sponsorships on the channel. Shout out to Future Harvest Nutrients. Before then, we had Remo Nutrients. Before then, we were with Green Planet Nutrients. And if you're with, honestly, when you're my question that I was going to pose to you guys was cost. How much are you guys paying? If I was to pay for one of these lines in full, I'm looking at about probably $400 for the entire line. How long would that last somebody? Well, you play your cards right. That line could last you an entire year. If you're getting, say liter bottles, you're not going to use, and let's say you're being conservative. I'm talking about a personal grow here. You're growing no more than say 5 plants a cycle. You're going to get a good year out of that. So my question then would be then to you guys, because as a synthetic gardener, one of the most common arguments I get is organic is far cheaper. But I've looked at a bag or a few bags, and I question. I ask: is organic that much more cheaper than synthetic? If you were to say if you were spending, say, on average, or anywhere between, I'll give a margin of error, anywhere between say $400 and $600 a year on nutrients, what would you be doing for organic?
So I look at it this way. It just depends on the organic side you're doing. A super soil is going to be like your initial cost is going to be a little higher. But I kind of equate it to, it's different in pricing, obviously, because the housing market's garbage. But you look at garbage in a good way for people selling, obviously. You look at the renters versus buyers argument. It's like, well, over time, this has more value. Like, well, yeah, maybe putting down money, like I had to make a down payment and this and that. Over time, this has more value. I'm not just throwing it away. As where a synthetic-based nutrient, it's almost like you're throwing it away. You can't reuse it. Once it's done, it's done. It's not in your medium again. You're not going to go and say, all right, cool, let's just reuse this. Some people will do that, and they'll add amendments to it, and they'll have like a new decent mix for their veg time. But for the most part, it's done. You throw it
There'd
out.
be
it's
there
over
would be
with.
a lot of fucking homework involved in trying to reuse your excrement and reformulating that into some. You're amending. You would be doing
Yeah,
something
you're almost
that would.
back into an organic side.
Right. So I'm not sure you could even continue that argument. And I'd be very interested in somebody who does a process like that.
Yeah, I know a few people who do. Like they'll cook out their soils or their cocoa, basically make it inert, make it dead, and then re-add to it. They'll get the basic stuff to it. They'll add some mycorrhizae, and boom, they're back in business. But that process again, you're adding labor in, and for me, time is money. Time is money, baby.
Always.
So period. I don't give a fuck. I'm not gonna waste my time doing all that kind of stuff. I would rather go because again, I'm running both. I've got the organic side and I've got a mineral-based side, and one's cocoa, one's soil. So with cocoa, I'm throwing it out when I'm done. Like literally, that's it. It's just done. So I know people who reuse it. I'm not that guy. I don't have time to do it. I just go buy more. The soil, the beauty of it is I can take it, I can cut my plant out, and I could either do like a no-till style and just replant it there, or I can chop it all up, chop those roots up, and put them into a bin, and now they're going to break down into itself, and I've got this soil to use again. I could add more food to it. The craft blend that I use from Build a Soil, you just continuously keep reusing this soil, and it's going to get better actually over time. Like Green Goblin's got some for like 5 or 6 years now. I walked in the basement, I was like, what the fuck are all these tubs? Like, oh, that's my medium. I was like, oh, you bought a bunch already? He's like, no, dude, that's the same stuff since the Master Kush years ago. I'm like, oh shit. Wow, okay. Good job. And again, very cost effective. He's got some things that he's been able to buy from the local farmer store that's extremely cheap because it doesn't say cannabis anywhere. And it's like his cost is very, very, very minimal. So the overall return on investment long term, I think, is better. Initially,
Are you
synthetic.
spending nothing in order to maintain that soil?
You're spending very little because for the most part you can't buy a lot of these blends or a lot of these products other than a few pound bag or a pound bag. So you get it once and you're going to be able to use that initial investment. Just go back and scoop a cup out of it, sprinkle it into your mix, and you got it again for next year even. Like it lasts for so long. That's the
Mhm.
difference is where you'll see people who buy gallons of
And the
nutrients. You're
shel-
like, why do you get so much? You're like, oh, the cost is way better.
Right.
Comparable
And you
here.
can you have the shelf life, like that stuff will last on the
Yeah,
shelf for
'cause it's
12-ish
just
months.
dry, no liquid, no. As long as you keep it in the right
It's good.
conditions, like
Good.
it's
So
got
then another
the
so then
perks.
another sorry then another question that I would ask then, would organic by definition be more prone to pests?
Not necessarily negative pests.
Well, no, but would you, because we're growing indoors, right?
Yeah.
And the inclusion or invitation to really any pest is going to be unwanted by your spouse. Let's just lay that on the line.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's for
So
sure.
so
Anything
can you
flying.
argue? Because here when I dabbled in, I was going to go organic. I had the idea that I was going to go organic. Living in the northern portions of our continent, I find it's quite cold during the wintertime. So I have a difficulty because in my opinion, going organic is more than just buying a bag of amendment and adding it to your soil. It's like going vegetarian. You can't call yourself a vegetarian but eat McDonald's. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So to me, the idea of going organic is, well, where did you get your shit from? Because if organic is as organic as I feel, if you've got a child labor camp that's scraping, bat guano out of a cave in, some place in Africa to get your amendments, is that as organic as it could really be? Or how much fossil fuels were burned in the extraction of those amendment, or in you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
That's a
I'd
good
be
question.
curious to know. So needless to say, I'll digress slightly. When I had the idea of going organic, I was going to do my own compost. I was going to try to compost all my food, and I was going to do a worm bin. So I spent a lot of time and a lot of effort trying to learn about composting and worm bins. Composting is great if you have an ability to put it somewhere outside of your kitchen. You need a bin outside in the yard where you can churn it, I think is the proper way to say. Keep it moving and not frozen, because essentially that's what happens in my part of the country, is that it freezes for 6 to 8 months of the year, and trying to maintain an outdoor habitat of any kind is very difficult.
Yeah.
So the same thing can be said about my worm bin. So I tried to bring that shit inside, And I found out very quickly that my worm bin was a magnet, obviously, for pests. I had tons of these little red fucking, I don't know what they were, but let me tell you, my wife was not happy about it. So our worm bin ideas went right out the drain. I tried to keep it outside to see if maybe its own habitat could. No, -50 kills just about everything. So in order for me to go organic, I feel that it needs, I need a place for my scraps in my yard, or my scraps from my kitchen. I need somewhere to put my yard clippings, in order to turn this into a system that can really benefit from itself. Now, maybe that's a large definition of organic, but to me, if you're going to go organic, you're going to be far more prone to pests, just because you're trying to create a habitat within the soil, which then would be, with my reasoning, would then be a habitat for bugs. So,
yeah.
Is that the case?
So you don't have to do the compost. That's not a requirement when it comes to organic. Now, I understand that's ideal. Some people say that's ideal state is you're using your scraps, turning into compost. That's more economically friendly, right? But you don't have to do compost. You can just buy a blend of organic and then top dress and amend. And then also inoculate is another thing that you can do, is inoculate microbes in there to kind of help with the breakdown of nutrients. But I don't compost. I don't have a compost pile. That's something I would, definitely looking to do in the future. But it's not a requirement when it comes to organics. So just want to kind of mention that. And then to answer your question about pests, one of the most common, I think, is fungus gnats, because your medium's always wet. Top of the medium, that's where fungus gnats thrive. So a common problem, especially when I'm using earth dust nutrients, is fungus gnats. And if you look at their reviews on their site, lots of people are coming across fungus gnats. But as long as you have, a good battle plan, then, and initiate that plan, you should be fine. So, for example, those yellow sticky traps, a very common thing that people use.
I see them everywhere.
Yeah, you can add those in there. If you let your medium dry out once or twice with organics, like, it's not really ideal, because you want the microbes to be working those nutrients down. But that's a way to get rid of fungus gnats, is to let the medium dry out. And then the fungus gnats will go away after that. That's the way I battle them. I come across them once in a while. And there's also sprays. I think neem is one of the sprays that you can use to battle fungus gnats as well. But yeah, it is common. It's more common, I think, to have.
Because I can say that when we talk about pests, I have, like, I don't deal with pests. I don't have pests. Pests haven't really been an issue for me. Now, I know that's anecdotal, and I know many nutrient growers that have had issues with pests, but I'd be curious to know if that would be a pro or a con towards synthetic or organic.
I honestly think that again, a preference thing, because synthetic side, you're going to have to control all that. Organic side, there's a lot more things within your medium depending on how you're going about it. If you've got something like a super soil, you could even introduce something like nematodes. There's all sorts of different things that'll naturally work for you in your mix, so you don't have to fight it as much. So there's the pros in that sense. But then let's say if you want to go and do a quick kill, you may kill the beneficial stuff in your medium if you try to hit it with anything serious, like even a natural oil of some kind, like a green cleaner, that still could be harmful. So the synthetic side, if you do deal with pests, can be more beneficial, especially if you've got a serious issue coming in. But I feel like long term, the IPM is going to be a little bit better with organics. But it's like you do kind of set yourself up for being more susceptible to having those pests.
You said it. A good battle plan is important. This can all be avoided. My question is whether you'd be more prone to, not whether or not you can avoid it, because you're right. A good IPM and a good battle plan will get you through just about anything, and that needs to be taken into consideration. I think, honestly, I don't think if we were to compare IPMs, and maybe this is for another episode, if you were to compare IPMs, maybe mine is no different than yours. I try to be proactive rather than reactive. I do sprays fairly regular, at least once a month, of at least 3 different kinds to keep it a variety, but I'd be curious to know if we vary that much in IPM.
Yeah,
because in trying to incorporate what you guys do in the soil as well.
Yeah, and I think that would be we may have to save that for another episode, just because I think that covers a lot in the sense of how I've changed over the years and learning more about natural measures and preventative measures in comparison to reactive things. So let's save that for another episode.
That's a good idea.
That's a good idea right
Yep,
there.
that's a good idea. But I do want to mention though before we go, because you guys have done a fantastic job at discussing and at least enlightening myself towards organics and really the life that's involved inside the pot. Because there's one thing that can't be denied is that you're feeding the soil, you're feeding the roots when you're going organic, and that's key. And that's key. If there's anything that can be mentioned about synthetic and in its simplicity, as you advance through your career, anything is going to become more complicated. And when you start to hone in a good nutrient line and you start to take advantage of its phosphoruses and its sugars towards its final flowering time frame, you are going to see some very serious results. It can be slightly complicated when it comes to delivering that dosage at any particular time. But the argument for simplicity is certainly valid, but common sense and diligence and hard work pays off no matter what kind of avenue you choose, regardless of that.
Totally agreed, man. I think that's where people need to listen to episodes like this. Listen to the first episode going over the easiest grow, because preference is key. Just because your homie does something doesn't mean it's the exact right way to do it for you. Because I know myself, I've tried exactly what someone else has done and it sucked ass. Horrible results for me. So it's just variables, man. So many variables come into play. The climate, the environment, genetics, equipment, your schedule. I mean, everything. So you got to keep that in mind, whether it's organic, synthetic, bottled, dry, it really doesn't matter. You need to know what works for you and keep that in mind no matter what you decide.
Yeah, I think I'm still going to kind of recommend for new growers, someone who's brand new, I still am going to recommend kind of them to get their feet wet with bottles, even if it's just one grow, just so they can understand it. And like Pigeon said, you just look at a label, mix the nutrients a little bit easier, but don't let going organic intimidate you like it intimidated me.
And me.
Start off with a blend, start off with a craft blend. That's probably the easiest way to do it, is start off with something like Earth Dust Nutrients or like a Dr. Earth. There's a couple different blends, several different blends out there. Maybe start with that, start with amending, start with top dressing, and then slowly learn, right? Continuous improvement, continue to learn about different things that you can do, such as inoculate the medium with microbes, whether it be mycorrhizal fungi, something like Mammoth P or Recharge. You can add that on top of your initial organic blend. And then you can get through your grow with that. And then maybe teas is the next step for you to learn how to make a tea. So that way, when you're in mid-flowering, you can give that plant a boost. Start seeing deficiencies, you can give that plant, that boost of microbes and get that activity going. But start slow, and work your way towards that compost pile, which you're saying, Pigeons had mentioned earlier, the compost pile, and how you can basically make your own compost out of your food scraps. And then you can use that to top dress. And then you eliminate that craft blend that you're buying, right? Because you're just top dressing with your own compost that you've used from food scraps. And that's kind of, I would say, kind of the next step after that. And you can even go into like no-till, where you're adding in worms and you're not even tilling the medium at all. So I feel like there's different levels of organic, and, starting slow, starting with the basics and slowly working your way to more and more and more. Like Rob had mentioned, I think in the long run, overall, organic is going to be better for time savings, cost savings, and environmental purposes.
But it's a long term. You got to think marathon, baby.
I'm curious to know, if you were to take an organic bud and a synthetic bud, grind it up, put it in a bowl, smoke it, would you know the difference?
Hell no. There's so many people who tell me, they'd be like, I can taste the salt. I'm like, no, you can't. You're a liar.
You're not coming over to my family barbecue, you lying motherfucker.
Yeah, I think, again, it's preference, of course, but there's some different looks. You'll see, of course, people who are using things like PGRs. Definitely don't do any plant growth regulators. Is horrible. Don't do it. Certain things that will modify the way your bud structure is But for the most part, there's not a whole lot of difference. I've never seen a big difference. I have seen maybe more enunciated trichomes on synthetics. I have seen bigger, tighter bud structure. But when it comes down to smoke, no difference for me.
The first
we'll
time I
see.
ever did organics, I got a lower yield. Okay, smaller plant, lower yield. And if you come across that, one of the main reasons why it could be is because you just don't have that microbial population in the soil yet. Right. So maybe I didn't have enough microbes in the soil to break down to give the amount of nutrients that the plant needed. So, continuing to feed that soil, inoculate, so on and so forth. The first time around, your yield might not be as big as synthetic, but if you're continuing to feed that particular soil and you're continuing to do grows in that same soil, it should, be about the same yield, if not surpass the yield of synthetics.
Do not give up. I can't count how many times I've failed with synthetic. We're going to talk about simplicity. I have failed and failed and failed and failed and failed and failed and failed. And it's like, don't give up. It sounds like you might have struggled with your first harvest. And what? You did not give up. You did not give up. You learned, you adapted, you overcome, and you moved on. Do not give up.
And even if you start organic, right, you start with that craft blend and you amend and then you top dress. If you start to see deficiencies, you can always switch to bottled nutrients, right? You can always, during that grow, you can give like a quarter dose of nutrients, for example, just to kind of give that plant available nutrients so it can recover from the deficiencies, right? It's not going to, there's still a lot of debate on if salt-based fertilizers kill microbes or not. So we're not going to get into that, but you can absolutely mix both organics and synthetics. So
that's a great point.
I've had an organic grow starting. All of a sudden I come across deficiencies week 2, 3 of flower. So I'm like, you know what? Hit it with a dose of synthetic nutrients. Boom, that plant recovered. Still did kind of the mid flower top dress with the organics and was able to survive without drastically reducing my yield or anything like that. So weaning your way off the bottles is another way to go about it.
That's a great point. I didn't know that. I didn't know. Weaning off the bottles, bro. I need to be weaned, bro.
Trying to get my 2-year-old off of that too, so I'm gonna have to work on that multiple ways. Yeah, I think that really covers it, man. That was a great episode. I like diving deep into things like that. When it comes to, that's where the three of us, we have different preferences, of course, but they seemingly align pretty damn close. I think that's why From the Stash became a thing, man. Definitely makes sense. So, obviously, make sure you check out all of our latest drops. Seen some fire dropped over there. That topping video, killer, Chris. Loving the transitions and stuff, man. You're killing it, bro. Pigeons, obviously glad to see you out of YouTube jail. Free.
Yeah, back.
He's a free man.
I'm back.
Otherwise, always on Twitch. Keep an eye there. Cannabis Lifestyle TV. We lost all of our strikes.
Hey.
Nice.
Thank you, YouTube.
Congrats, man.
Susan saw that little diss thing, and she was like, okay, enough, kids.
No, yeah, right.
Right. Yeah. So you'll see us there, Cannabis Lifestyle TV. It's your boy, Rob. 420 Growers Club. Obviously, you can check everything out there. Pigeons 420. Mr. Grow It. We'll see you guys next week.
Peace.